Hi, BrenTech here, where tech is made simple. So about 3 weeks ago, I posted a video letting you know that after Microsoft had originally pushed 16 gigabytes of RAM as the baseline to run Windows 11, Microsoft then had done a 180 and had then come out saying that 8 gigabytes of RAM is good enough for everyday tasks on Windows 11. I'll leave the video linked if you'd like some more information. Now, in regards to 8 gigabytes of RAM being good enough for everyday tasks, as you may well know, recently Microsoft released a 2026 refresh of its Surface laptop, which had been downgraded from 16 gigabytes of RAM to 8 gigabytes of RAM, which I do think Microsoft did because of the increasing hardware costs and RAM, especially the RAM prices being increased so drastically of late. Now, getting back to 8 gigabytes of RAM being good enough. According to reports, the Surface laptop with 8 gigabytes of RAM installed didn't perform that great in its so-called downgraded state. And it was noted that even where there was a slight bit of load on the device, the performance wasn't that great and was sluggish and poor compared to the 16 gigabyte version of the Surface laptop. And this difference was mostly due to the memory being a massive bottleneck apparently, and not down to the processor or drive or anything else. Now, I use 8 gigabytes on this device, as you can see. And as I've mentioned previously, I do find that it's enough for what I use this device for. I only video record on this device. But with all that said, from time to time, I do get a bit of a glitch or a bit of a freeze, which isn't that big a thing to write home about, so to speak. But nonetheless, I'm sure one day I'll just pop another 8 gigs and pop this up to 16 when I get there. But nonetheless, I digress. So, an 8 gigabyte version of the Surface laptop, according to reports, isn't doing that great in regards to its performance compared to 16 gigabytes. And the Surface laptop provides approximately 7.6 gigabytes of usable memory. And during typical daily use, the system can consume around 6.7 gigabytes, according to reports. And Windows 11 may use approximately 4.2 gigabytes after a fresh restart. That's just idling, okay? Leaving limited capacity for other applications. And as you may well know, once your available RAM runs low, Windows then must rely more heavily on storage-based virtual memory, which can cause delayed responses and freezes and slower application switching and so on. Now, this is interesting that the tests, according to reports, say that the Surface laptop is sluggish with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Because, as you may well know, the minimum system requirements for Windows 11 to run, according to Microsoft, even now in 2026, remain the same as when Microsoft first launched Windows 11 back in 2021, with devices requiring to have just 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now, I'm not talking about AI PCs, Copilot Plus PCs, where that was raised to 16. I'm just talking about your normal laptop or your normal device. So Microsoft requires you just to have 4 gigabytes as a minimum to run Windows 11, which I think is absurd. I don't think you could run Windows 11 properly with 4 gigabytes of RAM. I know I have one of my Chromebooks has 4 gigabytes and that runs fine, but I don't think you're going to run Windows 11 on 4 gigabytes of RAM. So this is interesting that Microsoft says 4 gigabytes of RAM is the minimum, yet the Surface laptop, according to reports, can't run properly and is sluggish using 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now this is interesting because a couple of weeks ago I conducted a poll on the channel regarding Microsoft claiming that 8 gigabytes of RAM is great for everyday tasks. And I asked, so what's your experience? Out of the 1.2 thousand votes cast, the majority of you, 46%, said 16 gigabytes is the absolute real-world minimum. So that's interesting. And then the next highest score, as you can see, was 8 gigabytes is plenty for basic office and or web browsing. So interesting stuff. Microsoft saying that the minimum requirements to run Windows 11 are 4 gigabytes, which I don't think is good advice. Yet a Surface laptop with 8 gigabytes isn't doing that great. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Thought that was interesting. Always good to hear what you guys have to say. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.